October 28th here in the garden. We have had killing frost. It's been below 32 degrees. So some potatoes that came up got zapped. But then it's been warm for about almost a week and a half or so, and so stuff's coming back up again. I guess it's just, they're opportunistic, and this is a temp that works for them. Net positive, I would presume, for the potato. There's some more growing over there. We got lentils coming up. Really cool looking plant. Great one to just look at. I can show you lots of it. Over here, this is just stuff I got at the grocery store. Two different varieties. They definitely look different, and then a little mixed in from one of these cover crop companies, cover crop heavy companies. Anyway, that's cool. This is that one weed, the name I don't know, that has just dropped a bunch of seed as well. So, do your thing, that's cool. Let's see if I can show you some. There we go. Yeah, good to see everything hanging out. Let's take a look at the Chinese cabbage, Grex. I thinned it out a little the other day in their JLF, so I've been feeding the plant back to itself. I guess a little bit of cannibalism. You want to see what that looks like? There's that. So I have been feeding it just because, what the hell, I want to get as much growth as possible in the window that I get for these, which is actually still a ways off in terms of low temps. They're going to kill these off completely, and some will over winter. I was talking to a friend of mine online who I know through the land race course, and he was saying that he thinks that it's really more about the temperature of the roots. He may have been just referring to hot temperatures, but I think that in cold temperatures too, it seems that the roots of certain plants, because there will be legitimate damage to the tops. But yeah, so soil temp might affect how things overwinter, which is interesting to think about. It gets colder the higher up it is. As opposed to in the summer when it gets hotter the higher up you get. So that presents an interesting niche for the fungi, but also there are probably some ways that we can raise the soil temperature. Mulch seems to be one of those. I might spend a little time just, sprinkling a little more mulch on things today. But then, I've been thinking a little bit about experimenting with trying to maintain soil temperatures, or sort of to getting things hot in the soil. How much sort of aeration you would need, because it seems in heavy clay, which is basically what I think I'm working with here. You could sort of have the all the other ingredients there to get some hot compost going in a heavy clay environment, except for aeration. That seems to be the limiting factor to me. But anything above the heavy clay layer, you can definitely get going hot. So I don't know, I was just kind of thinking about what you could use JLF to sort of super inject in the soil at kind of high concentrations, if you could produce heat using that, and then some IMO2. So that might be something to look into. If you could, what if you could, in theory, make your own sort of heat source using just the soil? And then going from there, it would be easy to select for a fungus that would do that, I think, because you could measure soil temperature and tell it to keep going, or sort of select for the ones that perform the best. So that would be interesting. Then you could have greenhouses where the heat is always rising up to them, and you get you're releasing CO2 as well. Anyway, something to think about. Using JLF, especially in kind of super concentrated, undiluted forms, maybe, if you could get it strong enough so that there could be something going on, or feeding something like koji, using koji to elevate soil temperatures as well. Could be interesting to think about. There's another potato. This is in the field where I grew sweet corn and sesame together. More lentils. The brassicas are coming in kind of slow over here. I haven't really given them much water, and water probably is the limiting factor. Supplemental water. It has rained a few times. Anyway, yeah, stuff's coming up here, but it's definitely on a slow track. But there was not a lot of free water for me to work with. But these areas where I did get them going kind of early, like the Chinese cabbage there as well. I was watering these maybe every day for the first week or so. So they seem to do fine after you get them established. So something to select for as well, and you can do just sort of a gradation, watering more, watering less. 2 patches. Save seeds from the one where you water less. However far you're willing to take it. And then you could do pretty extreme trials on drought resistance. And using sort of the landrace philosophy, you can imagine what that would look like. Just plant as many different kinds of whatever you're growing. Genetic mix. Have a good Grex. then select for, and then just plan them all out and give them as much neglect as you can possibly afford to allow, while still having a sort of savable seed bank based on that. So, yeah, that's the idea there. Something to think about. A movie that I watched recently. It's definitely, I mean, the production of the movie is bad. The acting is kind of bad. It's by, you'll notice two of the guys are in like everything. These two actors, they're just TV actors. Anyway, the movie is called Mind Walk. And I would recommend checking it out. There's times when you're like, okay, we get it. They draw in sort of some elements of politics. And not like, Democrat versus Republican politics, but the idea that, we have to sort of govern ourselves. Politics, sort of in the same way that the Tao Te Ching is kind of about politics. And that's how I found this movie, was because I was reading about a book. I didn't read the book, but just about it, a book called The Tao of Physics. And then I saw that this guy who wrote it, I can't remember the guy's name, sorry, but he also made a movie. And anyway, so it's on YouTube for free. I would say check this out. And if you get where I'm going with this stuff, it, on a philosophical level, is pretty in line with systems thinking for sure, but sort of the idea that there are these intersections in nature that aren't deterministic. That the universe works on a mechanical level, but that it is sort of through analog means. Right? Although it is a mechanical system, the mechanics are sort of wood or whatever. And you can imagine somehow something being so sophisticated that it kind of just starts to run itself. These sorts of ideas are in line with, I think, what we're working with here when we sort of reorient our goals of growing and understanding and hoping that it gets better next time, that you have a smarter version of the plant to work with, one that's more accustomed to where you're working. And so in this documentary, well, it's not documentary, it's a movie, it's a dramatization. They cover things like the mechanical model of the universe, and that this pretty quickly breaks down, even at the level of the sort of the electron of an atom. There's a pretty strange thing going on here, in that the mechanical model basically breaks down there, okay? And that, chemistry had to be sort of reworked. Chemistry and physics were not really united until quantum theory came in, as far as I understand it. And that only sort of starts to work, the model starts to click together when you accept things like that the location of an electron is sort of only statistically there. It's always kind of there on some level, but you don't know exactly where. Okay. And that there's actually all sorts of things like that. Human language seems to be one of those examples where we can, for example, statistically, there are just words that you're more likely to use than others. And sort of the distribution of the words that anybody uses in a language all seem to follow the same distribution. It's called Zipfian distribution. You can look it up online. But what this means is that if you counted up the number of words that I say in any sort of context, the relationship between the most used word and the second most used word and the third most used word is always going to be this magical proportion that seems to pop up in nature, which is a Zipfian distribution. One thing you got to be careful about with this is that you, the fact that you are counting something may be sort of anything in nature seems to follow this rule of proportions because this is actually just a quirk of how we can count things in nature. So let's think of an example. The craters on the moon, the size of the craters of the moon follow Zipfian distribution. So if you were to count up all of the craters, or measure the size of all the craters on the moon and then sort of report back, you are first off going to have to divide them up. You're going to have to say, well, okay, these are sort of analog numbers that we're dealing with, but we need to digitize them. We need to rank them, right? So this is the most common size. And so in order to do that, you have to say, well, we're going to go from 10 kilometers wide to 9 kilometers wide, 10 kilometers wide to 9 kilometers wide, and so on, right? You're going to have to, on some level, say that there is a sort of unit of distribution that you're going off of. And so the same is true of words, right? When you are speaking, there's only so many words you can use, right? But most of the words we use most of the time are pretty common words. And there's actually there's a relatively few number of words that you most of the time in the language, but that you are pulling in these other words, right, rarer words, less frequently. But what this seems to show is sort of a quirk of how humans see things, how we necessarily have to see things. But what I think it also illustrates is that human language does seem to have this unaccountable sort of property to it. It does seem to be creative in nature. We know that it's creative not just because of the things that it sort of evokes in our heads. A simple thought experiment can give us a sense that language is creative, but that it also